What's going on, guys? We are here to talk about K-Corp and the World Championship favorites, at least in my mind, going into this split. They might be eliminated from the World Championship after this last online qualifier. We'll have to see how it all pans out. But London hopes for K-Corp very likely over, but there's other European teams trying to fight for London, so we're going to talk about what is needed for those teams, including K-Corp as well, because there is a very small 1% chance that they do make it. And then we will talk about the World Championship spots of how K-Corp can make it to the World Championship based on just an online performance in this last open qualifier. It is still, like I would say, very likely that K-Corp is going to the World Championship. So let's all look at it. Let's see how it all plays out. Let's just get right to it. So we're going to talk here really quick about what teams need. Now, there's a three-way tie inside the top four, which is a good thing. Well, it's a bad thing for all these other European teams at first, but at least in terms of if one of these teams bombs out, it'll be a good thing then for the rest of Europe to try and catch up. It's a little different than my North American video that we put out last week, where it was two teams tied for the last spot. So you needed both of these teams to finish poorly in terms of trying to catch up. So if you want to watch that video, feel free. But in this case, it's three teams tied inside the top four spots. So you only need one of these teams to do poorly in order to catch up to that team. Vitality, very likely going to make it. They have a 4-point gap here. So we're not going to really talk about them here. We're going to talk about all the other teams with a three-way tie and then what teams are needed. If you want to just read the sheet, that's fine. You can do so, but we will go over it as well. So, Gentlemates, Oxygen, and BDS. If they get 8 points with a projected top 8 right here, that would be 5th place points. It's very difficult for any team to catch them. It eliminates Top Cougars, K-Corp, Forward, Team 3, Luna Galaxy. Resolve and Jobless are the only two that have a chance. Resolve would need to make it to the grand finals, and they would play a tiebreaker, I assume, immediately after the show to see who goes to London. Jobless would have to win the tournament and then play a tiebreaker after that. So, very unlikely, like if these teams all finish at least top 8, that any other team goes and we would have our 4 teams. It's very likely that these are going to be our 4 teams, but we're going to go over all the ways that they could possibly drop out. Again, 9th place, again, you only need one of these teams to finish 9th, and you can start catching up. I'm just writing all 3 here. But Resolve would need a grand finals appearance, but it wouldn't be a tiebreaker anymore. Jobless would need to win, wouldn't be a tiebreaker anymore. But this does open up the door for Luna Galaxy and Team 3. If they win the tournament, they would play a tiebreaker in order to see if they make it. Next up, 33 points for a 12th place finish. That is finishing 1 and 3 in Swiss. It doesn't change too much. Resolve and Jobless, they just need top 2 and a win still. Then Luna Galaxy and Team 3, they would need to win the tournament, and they wouldn't have to play tiebreaker anymore. That's the only difference in that 1-point gap between 34 and 33. Next up, a 15th place spot is another only 1-point gap, but it does make it a new 4-point threshold for 2 of these teams. So Resolve would then drop down to only needing the top 4. They would have to play a tiebreaker. Jobless would need to make it to the grand finals, and they would play a tiebreaker. Luna Galaxy and Team 3, it does not change for them. They would need to win the tournament to qualify still. Now, 17th place means you lose in the open qualifier portion. That's actually easier, I would say, than a 15th spot, because 15th, you have to lose 3 times in Swiss and not win a game. In order to not qualify, you only have to lose twice. And if you lose in that first upper bracket round, you could still win 2 lower bracket games and be eliminated in the third one as well. So you could finish the day 2-2 and be eliminated. So it's a little easier, I would say, for Gentlemates, Oxygen, or BDS to not qualify than to actually finish in 15th position. So they would get 29 points, and that's if they finish in the top 64. They would still get 1 point, I believe. So what that does is, here's where teams are hoping for things to happen. K-Corp is now alive at that point. If they win the tournament, they would then have to play a tiebreaker versus one of those teams. And honestly, if it is right after the show, very likely K-Corp wins that, I would say, because they're probably red hot. They just won a tournament. They would just have to do it again versus a team that didn't even play all weekend. Top Cougars, it's the same case for them. Sitting at 9 points, they would tie again with 20 to 29. Forward would need to win the tournament, so that would make them eligible as well. They wouldn't have to play a tiebreaker. Team 3 and Luna Galaxy, top 2s. Same with Jobless, a top 2. And then a top 4 for Resolve would get the job done. No tiebreakers there. It would only be a tie with K-Corp and Top Cougars. So, very likely, these 4 teams are going to go, right? Vitality, Gentlemakes, Oxygen, and BDS. Not many cases where that does not happen. So let's look at the World Championship picture for K-Corp to possibly make it. Because again, the World Championship, it's the same amount of spots. It's only 4 spots for these teams. So let's take a look at the current rankings of those 5 teams, including them. I should have put a little thing there. There we go. It looks so much nicer. All right. Europe rankings. We got Gentlemakes at 84, Vitality at 77. Both these teams are very likely. You know, they're going to make London. They're going to the World Championship. I'm not really too concerned there. K-Corp, though, 75 points. Because of their first split, they did amazing there. They still have a lot of points. So K-Corp sitting all right for now. And we're going to talk about why this last qualifier is so incredibly important for K-Corp, even if they don't make London for their World Championship hopes. But BDS is only 5 points behind. So if they finish the exact same at this next qualifier event, BDS is going to London, very likely. And if they do go to London, they're already guaranteed 5 more points. So they'll be tied with K-Corp until they win 1 game in Swiss. And honestly, based on who goes to this international event, it's very unlikely a European team goes 0-3. So BDS would just need 1 win in Swiss, and they would pass K-Corp. Oxygen is the main driving force between World Championship spots for K-Corp or not. Right now, 27 points behind. So if they finish exactly the same in Qualifier 6, and if Oxygen went to London, which again, very, very likely that happens, that they're going there, they would need a top 2 finish in order to pass K-Corp. That is huge. Like, if K-Corp can match Oxygen in this tournament, Oxygen would have to put on an amazing performance at London in order to make it. So Oxygen, not considered one of the favorites going into that event, I would say, unless they win this next one. But very likely not. They wouldn't be favorites. They'd be favorites probably to make top 8. But outside of that, it's probably going to be kind of pushing it. But obviously, you know, it's only 2 more wins away, right? So Oxygen would need to do a lot of work in London in order to pass K-Corp. But if they even just did 4 points better in this last event than K-Corp, and again, we'll go back and look at these, like most of these gaps are 4 points, right? From quarterfinals on. They're all 4-point gaps. So if Oxygen did 4 points better, say they're sitting at 52, obviously these points would both go up for both teams. That would be a 23-point gap. That is crucial for Oxygen, because then 23 points, all they would need is a top 4 appearance in order to pass K-Corp, and very likely at that point knock K-Corp out of the World Championship and move Oxygen on. So that 4-point gap could be insanely huge to determine who goes where. K-Corp could also clinch the World Championship in this last open qualifier. Say they win the entire tournament, and say Oxygen and BDS, we'll just say for this case, which I guess won't really matter much. So we'll just say Oxygen. So Oxygen finishes a quarterfinal exit. They get 8 points. K-Corp gets 20. That's a 12-point gap. So we already talked about this. Right now, there's a 27? So that'd be 39. So they wouldn't clinch there, but Oxygen would have to win the tournament by 1 point. Oxygen would beat K-Corp. But say Oxygen falls to 9th place. That is now a 14-point gap. We talked about it here. 27-point gap plus 14. 41 points. Oxygen would not be able to pass K-Corp. They wouldn't be eliminated yet because they could probably fight with BDS to determine that spot. But still, like, BDS also is way up there in points. So Oxygen very likely would have to win the tournament anyway. But in that case, even if Oxygen is going to London, K-Corp wins the tournament and Oxygen comes in 9th, K-Corp would clinch a World Championship spot. So, like, I get it. For K-Corp, things aren't looking great, right? They're probably going to be a little depressed. going into this last qualifier, probably already knowing, because if all three teams clinch at least a 15th spot, so going into that last weekend, a K-Corp's out at that point. But they have to know that it's so incredibly important for them to gain as many points as possible on both BDS and Oxygen to have a chance. My phone is ringing now. So absolutely huge for those two teams, or for those three teams: K-Corp, BDS, and Oxygen. BDS Oxygen, obviously, it's huge to make London. Again, I would say probably like 90% likely that they're going. But even past that, you want to get as many points on K-Corp as you possibly can to not have to perform as well in London to clinch a World Championship spot, or to just pass a K-Corp at the very least, and and then you'll clinch a World Championship spot there. Because obviously Oxygen and BDS will both be there, so they'll be fighting for points as well. But because, again, Oxygen is so far behind, very likely if BDS can just match K-Corp, they virtually clinch a World Championship spot going into London. They would just need one win in Swiss. If they do better than K-Corp, they will clinch a World Championship spot. And Oxygen, though, they desperately want to win this qualifier. Desperately. Like, obviously, they want to make London, but you don't want to have to place top 2 at London. You just don't. You want to be like, oh, I can maybe get a top 8 or a top 4. That's more reasonable. But desperately for K-Corp and Oxygen, I feel like this qualifier is huge. Absolutely huge for those two teams. So that is what is being played for in Europe. London, very likely locked up, but World Championship point speculation to see who makes it is still like up in the air. And I think the main driving force that we're going to be watching is K-Corp and Oxygen, and see how they fare versus one another in terms of placement. See how it all pans out. We got 2 weeks until that happens. Who knows what happens after open qualifiers? Like, if something weird happens in open qualifiers, then like I'll let you know the point update that we need for maybe just even major spots. But for now, here's where we're at for Europe in terms of London and the World Championship, especially for K-Corp and Oxygen. That fight is going to go down to the wire. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.